If you stopped creating tomorrow, what would you actually have? Not what you think you own, but what you actually control. Because let me tell you, there is a real gap between legal ownership and practical ownership that most creators and filmmakers don't discover until it's too late. Maybe you've spent about 5 years making films or some sort of body of work, a catalog, something that you're really, really proud of. And then someone wants to license it. Or perhaps you want to move on to a totally different platform, and then you realize you can't. Not because you don't own the copyright, but it's because you don't control the distribution. This is about the forensics of ownership, the actual mechanics of what you control versus what controls you. And once you start to see this gap, this really big gap, it's really hard to unsee it. I actually want to read you something verbatim from YouTube's Terms of Service. Section 8C. By providing content to the service, you grant to YouTube a worldwide, non-exclusive, royalty-free, transferable license to use that content. Did you know that? Now, I'm going to translate each of these terms so you know exactly what they mean. Worldwide means they can show it anywhere on Earth. Non-exclusive means you can also show it anywhere else. Royalty-free means they don't have to pay you separately for this permission. Transferable means they can give this permission to someone else without asking you, which is the real kicker. And later on, the word that appears, irrevocable. You cannot take this permission back, even if you delete your account, even if you delete all your videos. The license you granted YouTube for anything you ever uploaded remains forever. Now, this probably isn't a huge shock to most of you, but to some of you, it might be new news. You own the copyright to your work. That's true. You made it. It's completely yours. But a streaming platform approaches you and wants to license your catalog for, let's say, $200,000. They want exclusive rights, meaning they're the only place people can watch it. But your work is on YouTube, and YouTube has irrevocable license to use it. So even if you delete everything from YouTube, they technically still have permission to use it. And a lot of networks don't like that. The streaming platform says we need exclusivity, and you can't give it to them. You own the copyright, but you can't do what an owner should be able to do, which is control how it gets distributed. And that is the real gap between legal ownership and practical ownership. And most creators don't discover this until the deal is on the table and they can't close it. Say, for example, you raised about $5 million to build your brand, to tell your story at scale. You've been creating content with an enormous content team or a really great skilled team on platforms for about 2 years, hundreds and hundreds of pieces of content, pushing out brand awareness. And then your board asks, what assets do we actually own? What could we sell if we needed to? And you realize the answer is almost nothing. You own the copyright to the content, but the platform have irrevocable licenses. You can't compile it into a library you could sell to another brand. You can't license it exclusively to another partner. You can't even guarantee you could get it back if a platform terminated your account. But you spent $2 million on content creation and you don't have $2 million in assets. You have activity that performed and completely faded. But your investors didn't fund activity, they funded equity. But the default structure of platform creation doesn't find equity, it builds dependency. Here's a number that should terrify you. According to YouTube's own transparency report, they terminated over 90,000 channels in 1 year that were later reinstated after appeal, meaning 90,000 creators were shut down even though they did nothing wrong. The automated system made a mistake, a big one. And those creators lost access to their work, sometimes for days, sometimes for weeks. Their income completely stopped, their audiences couldn't reach them, and they had to appeal to a system that may or may not respond. Now here's the question, how many of those 90,000 creators had downloaded their own master files? How many had backup copies they controlled? How many had another way to reach their audiences if the platform completely disappeared? My guess, very few. Not because they were careless, but because they honestly just didn't know. You are one algorithmic mistake away from losing access to everything you've made. That's not ownership. That's hostage taking with better branding. There's a concept in risk management called single point of failure. It's when your entire system depends on one thing, and if that one thing fails, everything fails. Most creators have built their careers on a single point of failure. The platform. If the platform changes its algorithm, they hurt. If the platform terminates their account wrongly, they are destroyed. If the platform shuts down entirely, they lose everything. That is not a career. That is vulnerability dressed up as a career. And I think what makes this worse is that the platforms know this. They've designed it this way. The more dependent you are, the less leverage you have, the more they can extract from you. They don't call it extraction. They call it the creator economy and empowerment. But the mechanics are the same. You build the assets, they control the distribution, and they profit from the gap. Now let me show you the math about what ownership actually means with two hypothetical scenarios. So let's look at Storyteller A, who makes 50 videos a year for 5 years. That's around 250 videos, all on YouTube. This person makes around $100,000 over 5 years from ad revenue. That's pretty real money and not unrealistic from what some creators are making. But when they want to stop creating for a year, take a break, have a kid, do something else, their income stops because there's no assets, just activity. Storyteller B makes 10 films a year for 5 years. That's 50 films, higher quality, fewer pieces. They upload them to YouTube for distribution, but they also host them independently. They own the masters, they've structured them so that they can license them correctly. They also make around $100,000 from YouTube ad revenue over those 5 years, same initial income as Storyteller A. But then someone wants to license their catalog. And because they own it properly, they can do the deal. $150,000 for streaming rights. Now their 5-year income isn't $100,000, it's $250,000. And when they take a year off, their catalog still continues to generate income. Same amount of work, different structure, different outcome. The thing that most people miss about this comparison, it's not about working less, it's about structuring things differently. Storyteller B didn't make fewer total minutes of content. They just compiled it into films instead of fragmenting it into videos. They didn't work fewer hours. They just spent some of those hours on ownership infrastructure instead of optimizing. They didn't have better luck. They just had better mechanics. And the mechanics of ownership are learnable. It's not luck-based. You can absolutely learn these. You don't need to be more creative to own your work properly. You just need to understand what ownership infrastructure actually requires. And the problem is most creators never learn this because platforms benefit from you not knowing. The more time you spend making content for them, the less time you spend building ownership for yourself. Now, I want to show you what ownership infrastructure actually looks like, not abstract, but real concrete evidence. First, master files, higher resolution copies of everything you make, backed up in at least 2 places you control. Not just on the platform, not just on a cloud service that could change its terms, files you physically possess on external hard drives with multiple copies. This sounds super basic, and some of you are probably rolling your eyes, but most creators don't do this. They upload to the platform and assume that's the archive, but it's not. The platform is not your archive. It's a distribution system, and you need your own. Second, copyright registration, not just owning your work, but actually registering it with a US copyright office. It only costs about $65 per work, or $45 if you register multiple different works together. Why does this matter? Because if someone infringes and you want to sue them, you can only collect statutory damages if you registered this before infringement, not after. Otherwise, you can only collect actual damages, which is much harder to prove, and registration really just gives you that legal leverage. Third, direct audience access, email lists, newsletters, membership platforms, some way to reach people that doesn't really depend on an algorithm. Because if the platform changes or you lose access, you can still communicate with people who care about what you do and what you're creating. Now, this is what happens when you actually don't have control over the infrastructure and you need it. Say, for example, a brand wants to license or control your content library. For a campaign, they're offering maybe around $50K, but you don't have the master files. You only have a compressed platform version of it. So you tell them you need 2 weeks to track down the originals, except you can't find them because you moved computers twice and you never backed anything up properly. Sound familiar? The brand says, never mind, we'll just go with someone else who has their files organized. You just lost $50K because you didn't spend $200 on a hard drive. Or a conference wants to screen your film, but you need proof you own it because they've been sued before for showing unlicensed work. You didn't register the copyright, so you can't provide legal documentation. They say, we can't take the risk, and you lose the exposure and a really great speaking fee. You saved $65 on a registration, but you lost around $5,000 in the opportunity. The cost of not having ownership infrastructure isn't abstract, it's measurable in lost deals. And maybe you don't feel that right now. Maybe you are just getting started with your career. But later on down the line, when you have really valid content to work with, this is going to hurt you if you don't take care of it. For example, if you are a founder and your investors expect you to be building enterprise value, which means assets that can be sold. If you raised $5 million and you spent $2 million on content, but you can't actually control that content in a way that could be packaged and sold, you've created a library of a liability, not an asset. Your board will eventually ask, what's our exit strategy if we need one? And if your answer is, we have a YouTube channel with 1 million subscribers, but we can't sell the catalog, that's a real problem. Subscribers are not an asset that you own. They're an audience the platform controls. Views are not equity. They're activity that's already happened. What investors want to see is a content library that could be licensed, a catalog that could be sold, IP that has value independent of the platform. And if you don't have that, you're not building a media company. You're just running a marketing department. Listen, there's nothing wrong with that, but just know which one you're building and which one you're aiming for. Now, I want to talk about something that nobody really talks about, but everyone feels. When you know you own something completely, when you control the masters, when you can do whatever you want with it, you begin to make different creative decisions. You take different risks. You think longer in terms of horizons. You're not just making something for right now. You're building something that can compound, that can be rediscovered years later, that can be licensed in ways you haven't thought of yet. And that freedom, that long-term thinking, only comes from true ownership. Platform-dependent creators are always thinking, will this perform? Because if it doesn't perform immediately, it really has no value. Catalog builders, catalog creators are thinking, will this matter in 5 years, 10 years from now? Because that's when the licensing deals happen. Same work, completely different orientation. And that orientation comes from ownership structure, not personality. And the thing is about building ownership infrastructure, it starts to feel like overhead until it's not. Backing up files feels like extra work. I get it. Registering copyright feels like bureaucracy. Building an email list feels like a distraction from creating. All the admin stuff we hate doing as creatives. But the thing that I've learned over the years, the time you spend setting up ownership infrastructure really compounds. And believe me, it is a thorn in my side having to do anything other than create. I understand. But every piece you own properly becomes a part of an asset that grows in value. The time you spend just making content for platforms depletes, and each piece exists, performs, and fades, and you start over with the next one. It's the difference between building equity and paying rent. Both keep you productive today, but only one creates something that lasts tomorrow. And the creators who build lasting careers, who have something to show for 10 years of work, they're not necessarily more talented. They were just a little bit more strategic in how they set things up. They understood the mechanics of ownership much earlier. Now, I want to give you something a little bit more actionable right now. Pick your 3 best pieces of work from last year, the ones you are super proud of, the ones that represent what you are and what you were really known for. I want you to ask yourself, do you have the master files? Are they backed up in 2 or more different places that you can actually control? If not, do that today. Are they registered with the US Copyright Office? If not, register them this week. $45 for all 3. Could you send them tomorrow to someone who wants to license them? If not, organize them. Organize them in a way that you could. Set yourself up for success. That's 3 pieces, properly owned, properly controlled, properly positioned to generate value far beyond platform performance. Now do that with every important piece you make going forward. Not every TikTok, not every Instagram story, but the work that matters, the work that you want to compound, the work that you want to be known for 10 years from now. In 1 year, you'll have 12 pieces that are actually yours in a way that creates options for you. In 5 years, you'll have a whole catalog that has value independent of any platform. Here's what this all comes down to. You deserve to be in environments that bring out the softness in you, not the survival. Platform dependency brings out survival. You're always monitoring performance, always worried about algorithmic changes, always one step away from termination or from losing absolutely everything. Ownership, authorship, it brings out softness. You can take creative risks because you're building something for the long term. You can explore ideas and you won't perform immediately because you control how they're distributed. You can actually create instead of just optimizing for what works right now. That shift from survival to creation, that only happens when you own your work properly, not just legally on paper, but practically, fully, in a way that gives you options and leverage and freedom. That's what authorship actually means. Not just making work, but controlling what you make. So let me ask you the question all the way from the beginning again. If you stopped creating tomorrow, what would you actually have? Do you have masters of everything you made, backed up and under your control? Do you have all of the copyright registration for your important work? Do you have direct access to your audience and you don't fully depend on a platform to do that? Could you license your catalog tomorrow if somebody wanted to buy it? Or would you realize you spent years working incredibly hard and you have surprisingly little that you can actually control? You can start building ownership infrastructure now, today, before another 5 years pass. Because your work matters. The stories you want to tell, they really matter. And they deserve to be owned by you, not just legally on paper, but practically fully, so that you can give them new life on different platforms with full ownership and licensing control. And so you can build equity instead of just generating activity online. In the next episode, we're actually going to go and talk about why your best creative decisions come from the part of your brain that you're ignoring, about intuition, about system one thinking, if you've ever heard about that, about why optimization kills the thing that makes you different. But I just wanted you to understand ownership first, because all of the impact in the world doesn't matter if you don't control what creates it.